Everything you're going to see and hear in this video is being recorded right here through the Osee Gostream Duet 8 ISO. And I'm so excited to go see if the Osee Duet can do it all. I'm very sorry about all of that. This is a pretty nifty video switcher that includes, most of the features you would expect to see, along with a few surprising ones that you might not expect. Now, Osee did send this switcher to me at no cost, but I'm under no obligation to make a video, say anything, or do anything. And they actually sent it about a year ago, so it has been a minute that I've had it and been playing with it and experimenting with it, and now I just want to make a video as I kind of am comparing a bunch of different video switchers in a little series that I'm working on right now. And I currently have 4 cameras connected. So going back here, this is my Sony FX3 with a 20mm lens on it. This is my Sony a7S III with a 50mm lens on it. This is my Sony a7 IV with a 24mm lens on it. And this is the Obsbot Tail 2 with a default lens. But the reason I have this camera is because I got my little remote right here, so I can then more easily, kind of zoom in and show you exactly, well, if I can use the remote correctly, that is. So this is the switcher right here. Pretty standard design if you've seen video switchers, in the past 5 or 6 years. Very ATEM looking, except if you've ever used an ATEM, and this is the most basic ATEM there is, they have a lot of buttons, but a lot of times you don't really use any of these buttons if you're not using a Blackmagic camera. Like pretty much on this one, all of these buttons right here are specifically designed to be used with Blackmagic cameras. So if you're not using that, they don't really exist. I really appreciate what Osee did here because all of these buttons essentially do have manual control options. They're not just for show. So you have your 2 rows of, switching buttons, program and preview. You can do, you can do a preview mode. So we can select, let's say I wanted to go back to my main shot here. I can do auto and it's going to do a nice dissolve if I want to do that, or I could press cut and it will just cut back and forth. There's also a little, T-bar so I can cross dissolve, do the flag during a national anthem, very dramatic situation if I want to. Or, this works really, really well. Having this kind of T-bar control is super nice. Or, of course, you can just skip that altogether and you can just, switch manually by pushing the buttons right there, which is what I do most of the time in my workflow. And that's kind of the thing about Osee switchers. So if you're not familiar with them, I think they do a really good job. And one of the things they do is they gear their switchers specifically towards the broadcast world, the production world, I think. This is not like a thing that has been told to me. This is just sort of my opinion. It really seems like they design tools for, events, corporate productions, churches, those types of situations, much more so than just like the home streamer, at least with the Duet series of switchers. They're kind of more production-based, more industrial-based, and I like that because I think it makes it super clear who the switcher is for. You can use it in, a personal production, a home production, of course. It is actually quite good for podcasting for a few reasons we'll get into in a bit, but you've got your macros, your downstream keyers, your media pools, kind of your more traditional production elements built in here, and those are the things that make it very helpful for a production environment. Now, I'm not going to talk about every single feature of this. I don't want to just do a spec rundown. You can go to their website and read that. I kind of want to highlight some of my thoughts and some of, the more interesting things about the Duet 8, at least according to my perspective. Now, right off the bat, it is called the Duet 8, and Osee does also make the Duet, which I did a video on a while back, that is like sort of a different kit version that has like a built-in screen and stuff. It's pretty cool. That is, your traditional, it's just a smaller, simpler version of this. The Duet 8 has a bit more functionality and a bit more versatility, but a little bit different from what you might think. If you've kind of been in the world of video switchers recently, you know that a lot of options, like you can get the YOLOBox Ultra and the YOLOBox Extreme with 8 HDMI inputs. You can get the ATEM Mini with 4. You can get the ATEM Mini Extreme with 8. So you kind of, there is this thing where it's 4 or 8, 4 or 8. So then seeing that this switcher has 8 in the name, you would kind of expect 8 inputs. And while that's sort of true, it's also not really true. If I turn that here, you can see every one of the inputs actually does have the option to be HDMI or SDI, but there are only 4 physical inputs, 4 HDMI inputs, 4 SDI inputs. You do have 2 USB ports back here that can be inputs or outputs. So if you want to connect a webcam, you can do that, but also if you want to connect it to a computer, that's how you would do it that way. There is a desktop app called Gostream Control that works on Mac and PC, which is actually quite good, and it is a good way to load in media to the media pool if you don't want to use an SD card. It's also a very easy way to rename your inputs. So right now on my screen here, it just says input 1, 2, 3, 4. But if you want to name those, very specific names tailored to the project you're working on, it's easy to do that through the app as well. But the beauty of a hardware switcher to me is the hardware. I like the physical buttons and everything. So I primarily use it this way, which is I've got the switcher here with everything running into it. And then I have a mini display here that I'm just running one of the HDMI outputs into. And you do have 3 outputs. So you have 2 HDMI and an SDI output, which is really nice because you can also assign those outputs to be different things. And so I've got my multiple inputs here on this display, and then I can also go through the menu. That's kind of what we're seeing down here. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit as we go through that. Or typically it would also just show the audio happening right over here. And that is really helpful, so I can have the multi-view output on my screen right here. But if I were doing an event or something where, say, I needed to run an output to a monitor or even like a projector or a big screen at the event, I could choose a specific source to highlight over there. That's just a really nice piece of versatility that not every switcher has, and I appreciate seeing in this one. And you can use those 2 USB-C ports for webcams, which it works pretty well. I've used OBSBot, DJI, YOLO. I've used all those different webcams. They work quite well. Or you can also use it to connect it to a computer like I mentioned, or to connect an SSD, and that's what I'm recording into right now. You can see my recording things right here. So record, stop, or then ISO recording. I'm actually not doing ISO recording, but I could if I want to, and I'll show you some of those really cool settings in the menu in a moment. But the reason it has 8 in the name, even though there are only 4 inputs, is because you do have 8 options for inputs. It's essentially like 4 traditional, either HDMI, SDI inputs, and then 4 other ones. So those could be your USB webcams. They could be an NDI source, a network source, something like that, a thing from the media pool. So you can have 8 sources. It's just that 4 of them are your physical HDMI things, which it's a little bit kind of confusing if you see the name in the world of lots of actual physical 8 input switchers. So that's just kind of something to be aware of. Now the MSRP of this switcher currently is $899. So it's a $900 switcher, which puts it, in the higher end of the ATEM lineup. It's less expensive than the full-size Rodecaster Video, but more expensive than the Rodecaster Video S and of course the Rodecaster Video Core. It's less expensive than the YOLObox Ultra, the YOLObox Extreme. So it's at the high end of more traditional switchers right before you get to kind of the full-on production suites, because things like the Rodecaster Video and the YOLObox, that's where you can put together whole scenes and stuff. This, you can key out some graphics and stuff, but you're not going to be putting together like really in-depth scenes and very nice like split screens and super customized stuff super easily. And it is a 1080 switcher, so there is some versatility in terms of you can take HDMI inputs, you can take SDI inputs, it can take 4K inputs, but its output is capped at 1080/60, which again in the world of production kind of makes sense because most event production and kind of corporate streams, church stuff, that's all done at 1080/30. Maybe 1080/60. So it is kind of geared more towards that world. And for $900 currently, you're just not really going to get any 4K multicam options. The cheapest ones I can think of are the YOLObox Extreme and the newer Pixelgate, which 2 very different approaches, but both of those are about $2,000. So for $900, you're getting a lot of functionality, but you're not getting 4K output. Now what you are getting that you don't see in a lot of other switchers are 2 XLR inputs with a preamp that has 75 decibels of gain. So that is on par with the Rodecaster Video. The preamp, that's what you're listening to me on right now. This is the Warm Audio WA87 Junior microphone, which I quite love. And this is a condenser microphone, so we're running phantom power out of the switcher here. I don't have any effects or processing, but I'll go through in a second. There are actually some EQ and some effects. I don't know that this preamp is quite on the level of a Rodecaster preamp. And even though there is built-in EQ, it's not quite as simple as the Rodecaster, which lets you just do some really cool presets. And it kind of has like a really nice visual way of adjusting your EQ and your processing. This is a little bit more technical, but very few switchers have any EQ or processing built in, and very few switchers have dual XLR. So this is like, It might not be right on the level of Rode, but it's like right there. And I think that that's pretty impressive considering that Rode is an audio first company. The fact that this competes with that, I think, is impressive. And that's what you're listening to right now. Everything you're seeing and hearing running through here. And there is also a 3.5 millimeter audio input if you want to use that. There's a 3.5 millimeter headphone output. And of course, as is the case with pretty much any switcher, you can bring in audio from your sources. So if I had a microphone connected to this camera, I could actually just use that audio, even though that mic isn't itself connected directly to the switcher. Now I do want to take you through the menus a little bit, and you can see I do have an image loaded up on the media pool, so I can bring that up. It's a podcast bit of artwork. The thing is though, this is a square piece of artwork and it has been stretched to be 16 by 9. So something to note is that you have to be very, very specific about the media that you load into the media pool. Make sure the aspect ratio, the size, is 16 by 9. Otherwise, you're going to get the squishy, stretchy look for your photos and your videos. So just kind of be aware of that. Not the biggest deal in the world, but just something to note. Now, let's talk about the menus. There is a menu button on here, and then you can just go through this little dial and select it. So you can see that if I bring it up right here. I'm not going to go through every single option. I do have that video on the Duet kit, the 4-input switcher, and I go through every single menu option in that video. So if you want to see how Osee menus work, check that out. Here, there are just a few specific things I want to highlight. So again, one of the reasons I say that this is a more broadcast-oriented switcher is because those first options you see are geared towards things like multi-source keying and then your media pools and stuff like that. We do have an auto switching option, which you can adjust in the app or you can set here. And that basically means it's a video follows audio option. So you can pair an audio source to a video source. And then, when that audio source is activated, that video source will be activated. So it's great for podcasts where you want things to switch kind of naturally. You can adjust it a little bit. It's a bit robotic. Again, I kind of do it in that other video. It works very, very well, but it doesn't have... My favorite one of auto switching is the Rodecaster video because it has some sort of algorithm that kind of not just pays attention to what audio is assigned where, but it also kind of switches things up and gives you like reaction shots, and it really does feel the most natural of all the devices I've seen so far that have auto switching. But the auto switching in here is very capable, especially if you just want to make sure, when this microphone is active, this camera is active. It will do that very, very well. Now, if we go to the stream options, you do have some pretty cool options to stream directly from the player itself, and it does have an Ethernet port, so you can have essentially 3 stream destinations at a time. That could be anything like YouTube or Facebook or Twitch or whatever, but it can also be your own custom server if you want to just load in that yourself. You've also got your recording options here, and that's where you can go ISO. So you don't have to just do all or nothing, which is really nice. If you're doing ISO recording, you can choose which inputs you want to include in that and which ones you don't. That's super nice, so you don't just have a file that's filled with, a bunch of empty inputs that aren't being used. And then you do have your input options here, so this is where you can choose basically what you're using on each thing, including NDI. I actually don't have NDI activated on here, otherwise I'd be using the tail 2 via NDI. But if I did, it would be right here. I can click on that, and then any active NDI sources would just pop up right here. A really important thing to note though is if you go into outputs and quality, recording and streaming quality out of the box for some reason are set to low. So make sure that you go into those and set it to high, so that way you have a high quality recording and a low quality recording. Otherwise you might be disappointed with your new switcher when you see the recording quality. And then of course we've got sort of our basic other settings here, and this is where you can also update firmware if you want to, just via an SD card in the switcher. I do want to go back up to audio though, because this audio mixer, this is where things get pretty fun. So we have options for the 2 XLR inputs, all of the different inputs, and then we also have headphone options, which I should mention actually. This is a big deal, and one of the few negatives I found with this switcher, there is a pretty significant latency delay with headphones. So that's why I'm not wearing them right now, and I am a little nervous because this microphone's a bit prone to plosives, so I'm sorry if you've been hearing them. That latency to me does make it very hard to wear headphones while listening to this because it's just too much of a delay if you're the one talking. If I was sitting, in a control room or at the back of an event somewhere, I don't think it would matter as much. But if you're the one talking and listening, it will break your brain. So I don't recommend doing that. I basically use the headphones to kind of double check how things sound and then take the headphones off and record without them. Let's go back to the microphones right here. So mic 2, that's the one I'm using right now. You can see I've got it turned on. I've chosen that mic 2 is going to be an XLR input. It's a condenser mic. And then here we can choose, the preamp level. I do have a delay of 150 milliseconds to make sure everything is in sync. And you can add a separate audio delay for every source, which is so nice because if you're using different sources, sometimes you need different delays. And then we can get into our EQ. So we do have a high pass filter, a noise gate, which if I turn on the noise gate, I think it actually works pretty well. So this is the noise gate on. You know, sometimes noise gates can be distracting, but especially condenser mic that's more prone to picking up environmental noise. Now you can kind of hear when I stop talking. It's very, very quiet. When I start talking, you can hear me. The trouble with noise gates is always making sure that they're not super distracting when they turn on and off, because that, especially if you're listening through headphones, can just become really distracting, especially in a longer form thing like a podcast or a live stream. I do think, though, out of the noise gates that I've used in devices, this is one of the better ones. And of course, you can dial it in. You do have options. If I go back here, you can kind of see we have some options for dialing in our noise gate, but I am going to turn that off just for now. We do have a compressor, and then you can turn on an equalizer, which basically lets you adjust your low, mids, and your highs. The problem, though, well, I call it a problem, but it's not really like a problem, is it's not as visual as like the Rodecaster. So you are working specifically with frequencies, which means you need to be a little bit more familiar with the world of audio rather than just looking at like, I want the lows to go up and the highs to go down. You kind of have to be a little more familiar with the specific frequencies that those parts of the spectrum take up, if that makes sense. But going back to these options, what I mentioned here is these are output sources. So this is where you can choose what you want to be sent via an output. Very, very nice. This is essentially your audio mixer. So that's where you can adjust levels. You can choose how you're going to mess with the different inputs. I have mic 1 and mic 2. Mic 2 is the microphone that I'm using right now, and it is turned on. Mic 1, if I switch this, I'm going to turn off this mic and now turn on this mic, and this is my Sennheiser MKH50, which is boomed out of frame. Actually, I think if I go to this camera, you can see it right here. It's a condenser mic boomed out of frame, and this is a situation where, if I go back here and go into my audio settings, since this microphone isn't close to me, it's not this one, it's this one over here, this might be an option, a situation where using the noise gate kind of makes more sense. And now I'm running an XLR mic boomed out of frame, and I do have the noise gate turned on. And if I want to switch back to my other microphone, it's pretty easy. I just turn this off, press mic 2, turn that on, and now I'm back over here on the warm audio microphone. So I really love the way the menu is easy to navigate. I really like the audio options on this. And just overall, you know, it is a very solid switcher. And a really cool thing, a really cool option that I want to do after this that Osee has on their website is for free, you can go to the product page for this and then download the file to 3D print a stand for this if you want kind of a stand to tilt it up or make it a little more permanent. I think that's cool. I think that's really fun. And I think it's cool that it's totally free to do that. But as is so often the case, nothing is perfect. So there are a few cons that I can't not talk about in this video. That might have been a double negative. The first con is the build quality. So you've got a lot of functionality here and a lot of stuff that is geared towards what I would call production life, broadcast life, but this is a very plasticky switcher, which is almost counterintuitive because a lot of times when you think of production stuff, you're loading stuff, you're unloading things. A lot of those devices and those tools need to be really robust, really strong so that they kind of stand up to that day in and day out. This, you know, it's been fine for me as someone who's like a home creator, but it is quite plasticky. And I do think that when you take it out of the box and you spent $900, you might feel like, oh, it's a little bit plasticky. I then do think that there are enough really cool features that you're going to forget about that and you're just going to be happy with the features, but just something to be aware of if you're very, very rough on your equipment. And I should have mentioned this is neither a pro nor a con, or I guess maybe it's a pro. There is a built-in fan in here, so you don't have to worry about overheating or anything like that. But just if you move it, you can sometimes hear the fan like, so when it's powered on, just let it stay still. And there is a power switch, which is pretty cool. There's just a little power switch on the back that you can flip on or off. Some things like the ATEMs, they have no power switches, so they're just kind of on when they're plugged in and off when they're unplugged. Another thing that I would like to see, which could probably be addressed in a firmware update, is there's currently no indication when an SSD is attached. So right now I have an SSD attached, I'm recording into it, but the only way I can really tell that it is attached is it starts recording when I press the record button. If I go into the software on a computer, then I can see that I have an attached disk. But I can't see that just through here. And I would really like to know just to double check that my SSD is working, that it's attached, maybe even something, you know, like a YOLO box or a Rodecaster, where it will tell you how much space you have left on that device. Another thing I'm not a huge fan of is the firmware update process. The simplest way to do it, not that it's simple, is you put it on SD card and you put it in here, but it kind of goes through this interesting light show. It's just a little bit clunky. It's something that took me a little bit of time whenever I have to do firmware updates versus something like a YOLO box or Rodecaster. We're just right on the device. It's like, hey, firmware update, you push the button and then it updates and you're done. And the last con is just something that might be a little bit nitpicky, but again, if we're in the price range where something could be, you know, a really all-in-one standalone unit. There is no way to manage really the style of your input sources. So there's not really any like color management options, which if you watch the video I made where I did a behind the scenes on a broadcast for the San Jose Sharks, the NHL team, I went into their broadcast truck, and color and style and tone is a whole department. You know, it's a whole like 1/3 of the truck. So I understand it's hard to just add that in on top of everything else. But if you want to color match things, if you want to stylize things, you don't have a ton of flexibility built in here. I'm okay with that. Doing pre-recorded stuff, I can just adjust the colors and things afterwards, no problem. But the thing that is a little bit tricky is the fact that you can't kind of like crop or swap or rotate your sources. So a lot of times I'll use an overhead camera, for example. And just the way that that works, I might want to crop in a little bit more so you don't see, you know, around the table that something's on, or it will be flipped and it's going to be kind of confusing when I cut to that camera, which is the case today, which is why I'm not using a traditional overhead camera and I was using the Tail 2 instead, because every time I cut to the overhead camera, it would almost like break the 180-degree rule and it looks confusing. If I could just flip that source 180 degrees and crop in a little bit, that would add a lot of versatility. You know, it'd be nice to be able to do that in all of these situations. Even a shot like this, say this camera wasn't as movable, being able to kind of crop in a little bit, maybe flip things if I need to, even level it out and rotate it. You know, being able to granularly adjust your sources is something that's not super common in a lot of video switchers, but it's something that I think is very, very helpful. And when we're getting into the $900 more, you know, pro broadcast situation switcher, it'd be nice to see something like that in there. But those are just my personal nitpicks. Whether those matter to you obviously depend on your preferences and your workflow and your different needs. Overall, this is a really excellent switcher that I think kind of takes what the ATEMs started, because they were really the first accessible video switchers, and they did such a good job with the whole ATEM lineup, but they also kind of lack a few things. So it's been fun to see companies like Osee kind of take up that mantle a little bit and, you know, put their own spin on things. And it really seems like they are listening to users' feedback, their own users, but also what people are saying about other products and then trying to incorporate it in their own. And you can kind of see it online because Osee has a pretty decent growing fan base and user base, which is super cool because I do like their switchers quite a bit. If you want, you know, that in-depth menu dive that I talked about, or you just want to see kind of a different Osee switcher, definitely check out my Duet kit review and walkthrough right here.